Well, here we are back at the Heiden and Ratner Level Up Leadership Podcast, and I'm grateful that you're joining us. If you're on YouTube right now, consider hitting that subscribe button, or maybe if you're listening to this wherever you stream your content, podcast-wise, maybe leave us a review. Let us know how God is using this podcast to help you level up in your leadership. Maybe even share it on social media or with a friend. We'd love to see that, tag it, and see how God's moving. Well, I'm excited because I know he's going to move in this session because one of my favorite leaders is on with us today. It's Pastor Will Browning, coming to us from Southern California. He is the director for Send California, the church planting network. Grateful for Send Network. I have the privilege of working with Send Network in Las Vegas, and we love learning from our brothers, our friends, right out there in the California area. Really quick, man, I know it's been a wild season with these fires. Just give us a little update from your end on what's going on with the fires in California.
Yeah, bro, it's been wild. It's been new for me. I'm a new Californian. I've been there just under 4 years. So I've noticed that every part of the nation has the things that they should be nervous about,
right?
And they're not. And then the things they get scared about. And it's weird that they are. Where I'm from in South Carolina, if it snows, the whole thing shuts down.
Yeah.
Man, we can't handle snow out there. But when a hurricane comes,
that's all right.
Dealt with a bunch of those.
Got it. Wow.
Here's the thing in California. Too many Californians are not scared of the fires. They've just seen so many of them, so they just let it pass by. But if it rains, that city will shut down.
How about
because
that?
of rain, because we don't get a lot of rain.
Right.
But I've seen some real fear in our eyes during these fires. The last one actually came really, really close to our town. We live in a town called Castaic. That's where the biggest last fire was. Man, they finally put that thing out a mile from the front of our neighborhood. So, man,
Really?
for all
That
those
close?
firefighters that are out there, just want to say thank you. I know you're putting your life on the line for people like me. Never see my face. But, man, we're so grateful for those firefighters and what they're doing. And, fire has something specific it does in this world.
Right.
It usually is tearing things down. But it also typically is providing new fertilizer, new opportunities for fruit. And while our city right now is facing a lot of things that have been broken down, we believe that it's going to create some new fertilizer, new fertile ground for God to take some ground in our city.
Yeah, that's good, man. I like that perspective. I know that it's devastating at the same time, and while you're in that, you're trying to think, okay, God, how are you in this, and how can you even use this for your glory and kind of Romans 8:28 and for our good. I know people that have lost homes and family members that are trying to navigate that, and I'm grateful also for people finding hope in the midst of pain, and I'm sure that you're living right there in the midst of it, and grateful for your leadership throughout. So speaking of this topic, leveling up in your leadership, maybe just take a moment in this season of life, right? You're 25 years married to Tara.
Yes.
Father of 3 kids.
That's right.
That are also now, you're an empty nester. They've grown, they've moved out.
Yep.
A grandpa?
Yes.
Come on.
Yeah.
How are you leveling up in your leadership in this season?
Well, I'm in a new season where I'm asking a different set of questions. The sets of questions that I'm asking when I was in my 20s had a lot to do with growth. In my 30s, I started asking a lot of questions about how do I sustain. But now as I'm getting to my 40s and now closer to my 50s, I'm beginning to ask the question, am I doing the right things right now?
Yeah.
Some of those things are on display. Have I done the right things in marriage right now are on display? I think we did, because we're going through a really great season together.
That's good.
I just, in one of our date nights, a couple nights back, I told Tara, I was like, I just don't want to mess up what we have right now. That is just a fruitful marriage, that we made the investments while we had kids, that the marriage would stay primary.
Right.
That's allowed for when the kids are gone, for us to have something that we are excited about. So now everything's kind of this new season. Just became a grandfather. Hard to believe that I'm at this stage and have a grandchild, but I'm learning about what does it look like to love my adult kids. It's different.
Right.
I can't be dad. I've got to be more coach. I've got to pick my spots better, I'm not the guy who needs to have the ball in his hand the whole time. I need to be the guy who's the setup shooter in the corner. And when you need me, I'm here.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you got the ball.
And you're going to knock it down.
I'm going to knock it down if you give it to me.
Yeah.
But I got to be patient because I'm not the star. So a lot that I'm learning just uniquely in a new stage of life.
Yeah.
Empty nest, grandparents. It's just a new place for me to learn and grow. And it's a good place for a leader to be.
Yeah.
Good place to be is, hey, I'm in a new place and I've got to keep growing. One of my staff members once said, my favorite thing about leading alongside of you, Will, is I know you'll never stop growing. Because the leader that no one wants to work with is a leader that's not growing.
That's good.
If you're a leader that's not growing, then you're a leader that people can overtake you.
Wow.
You got to keep growing if you want to lead the best.
Yeah. I mean, you're speaking to our language, right? That's why we're calling this the Level Up Leadership Podcast, for that reason, that we think everybody can get a little better.
Yeah.
Everybody, if they take leadership seriously, won't stay the same. In the past few episodes, we've even been referencing this book, Atomic Habits. James Clear just talks about that incremental growth over time could lead to really significant, substantial growth.
Right.
But it's that 1% better daily mentality. And I feel like that's what you're modeling. You're saying, hey, even in this season, it's a new era, a new city even, doesn't mean I'm going to stop growing.
Right.
In fact, it's an invitation to keep growing.
That's right.
And that serves to your leadership. I love that right there.
Thank you.
Yeah. One thing when I think about you in watching you lead a little bit from a distance and at times up close, I feel like relationships is something that has been a big part of your story in leadership. I mean, especially to mobilize many churches from the South, et cetera, to engage in kingdom activity in California. It just takes a lot of relationships to have speakers and pull off residencies. And, you're not just connecting with Southern California, but also Northern California and all the in-between. And so just talk about how relationships influence leadership, speak to the topic of leadership, things like that.
Well, I've heard someone say that ministry runs on the rails of relationships. I think that could probably be widened. I think business runs on the rails of relationship. I think economics runs on the rails of relationships.
That's good, man.
Even government runs on the rails of relationships. We have to understand that our intelligence, our emotional intelligence is critical for us to succeed in any sphere that we're trying to work through. I know for me, what happened was when we moved from one coast to the next, you go from lots of relationships to very few relationships.
Right.
And you got to put the effort in to start forging new relationships. And I'll tell you this, I'm an introvert. There's a certain level of interaction with people that's going to wear me down. But if I'm going to make an impact, I've got to forge the relationships with people. So right now, kind of my leadership plan for 2025 has been, how do I forge new relationships that challenge me?
Yeah, that's
good. So this has been my 2025 plan. So I started with one man. I called him up. I said, hey, I just want to learn from you. Sat down with him. He gave me an hour of his time. I asked him questions, wrote down notes, came prepared, made sure I made the most of the time, honored him in the midst of it. And then at the end of it just said, who's the best leader you know that I could learn from next?
Nice.
That gentleman, who was already a fantastic leader, put me in connection with the next leader who is leading a $400 million organization.
Wow.
And I said, awesome. Let me
do
sit
it.
down with him.
Yeah.
Asked him questions, honored him with that time, made sure that he didn't just hear me talk. He was the one that was talking.
Yeah.
Got to the end of it and said, who's the best leader that you know that I could learn from next? He introduced me to someone else.
Wow.
And I'm just really interested to see where this takes me. I've done all the schoolwork. I've done that kind of learning. I make sure that I'm reading books consistently. But the thing I think I hadn't yet done that I could do in 2025 was let me forge new relationships, new people to learn from. And the truth is, I can't really manufacture where this will go.
Right.
I don't know who the next guy is going to say you should learn from.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of this, I might learn more from businessmen than I would from pastors.
Sure.
It might be from professors. I don't know. The next guy I might meet with says, I know the executive at SpaceX. Why don't you sit down with him? I don't know where it's going to take me, but I know two things. I'm going to learn from them.
Yeah.
I'm going to treat them in such a way that if I ever need them again, they'd say yes to
That's
meeting
good.
with me.
That's key right there. Learning from them, which I think in that way speaks to honor. You know, just the fact that you're saying, hey, I see something in you that I'd like to learn from, I think is empowering. I think it takes boldness, and I think there's a level up leadership unlock that I think you can learn from what Will's saying here by just initiating, just not settling. I think there's a lot of excuses we can make, right? It's like, oh, well, you know, no one called me. It's like, who did you call?
Yeah.
No one reached out to me. No one brought me. Man, who did you go and reach out to?
Yeah.
And I want to say it's in Proverbs chapter 2. It just says the wise person searches for it like silver, seeks for it like gold, raises its voice for understanding, looks out, makes their ear attentive to insight. So I feel like there is this very real call to us. If you want to grow as a leader, you got to go get it.
Yes.
You know, even if that looks like, hey, I want to reach out to this one person and then ask them, who do I need to meet with next? Man, that is and you're going to get a whole journal of gold out of there.
I would say that the single most honoring thing a younger man can do for an older man is to sit down and ask for his wisdom.
Yep.
You honor that older man when you sit down and say, you have something to offer to me. I heard someone say this, hopefully I'll get this right.
Yep.
He said, younger men need to help older men finish well. But older men need to help younger men start well.
Start well.
Man, we need each other. We have something to offer both ways. But I think it does need to start with the younger man going to the older man and saying, I want to learn what you've learned.
Right.
That just puts the older man in a position that he is the sage, and it just forges a relationship that older man who may before not trusted that younger man now wants to invest in him.
Yeah. I love that right there. I think that's a really good word, so that regardless of the demographic of person listening to this, if you're older, hey, you got to help somebody start well.
Yeah.
Be that Paul to Timothy.
That's right.
If you're younger, make sure you got a Paul, right? And if you're kind of trying to figure out where you're at, you can be a Barnabas and just be an encourager to both.
That's right.
No matter what, encourage each other daily, right? While it's called today. I think that is powerful. One other thing that I recently heard you share about, specifically in the context with men, but I think all types of different ages and men and women can also glean from this, but it's just trying to just war against passivity. Right? Like, I think we live in a day and age where it's so easy to become passive. It's so easy to make excuses. It's so easy to just, hey, I'll get the next one. You know, or just kind of like turn the cheek and the eye and not have to deal with hard things. How has striving against passivity helped serve in your leadership? And how would you communicate that to somebody that's leaning in right now?
You know, I think specifically for men, going back to this seed that was planted in us when sin came, it had a unique way of attacking masculinity, and it had a unique way of attacking femininity.
Wow.
Specifically for masculinity, we were warned that this was going to make us passive. We see it in Adam's response, but we also see it in what is given to us on the consequences of it, that we are going to lean into passivity. And with thousands of years of humanity, that's exactly what's happened. The temptation for the man is to be passive.
Wow.
We want to lean towards rest. We want to lean towards not taking on greater responsibility other than what we've already taken. And typically, that means that some of the things that we care the most about are going to get the least of us.
Wow.
If you think about it,
that's real.
What happens with us is the people who give us the most amount of grace, we ask the most amount of grace from. The people who offer us the smallest amount of grace, we don't ask any grace of them. For instance, we know that our wife will give us grace if we need to come home late. But we know we will not be given grace if we come to work late. So we would never fail our job in arriving late, but we would fail our family in being late. This is simply because we know the person that will give us the grace. We can lean into that grace.
Yeah.
But what happens with that? We end up asking for greater grace from the people who love us the most. And what does that create in their lives? We look passive. We look like we're unwilling to do what is necessary in those spaces where we get the most amount of grace. So many men in the home are very, very passive. They're giving away their active spirit to their jobs, so they have very little to offer when it comes to active spirit at home. One of the ways that I love explaining this is, as a pastor myself, I'm constantly coming up with new things to say.
Right.
It's part of the place I've got to live. It means I've got to read. It means I've got to listen. I've got to constantly be taking in information so that I could be ready to be creative another time this week. Well, that's me being very active with my creativity in my job. But am I that creative in the way that I'm going to be invested in my marriage?
Wow.
You know, Tara would love for me to take some of that creative energy and invest it in date night.
Yeah.
Not just into sermon prep.
Man, that's convicting right there.
But what I want to do when I get home is I've already given away all that actively. I'm going to now sit passively by.
Yeah.
And the one who deserves it the most, the one who stood by me the most, deserves that creativity, but she's not getting it. Genesis warned us that this was going to happen.
Yeah.
And it has for most of us. So what do we do as men? We have to fight against passivity and do the opposite of that, and that is to take responsibility, to be active in how we are going to lead our families. I'm telling you, it is the exact opposite of what your spirit is going to want to do. You want to rest. You want to pull back. You want to allow for this to be a less stressful time. When the moment that we hit the garage door opener, that's when we're going into our most important moment. And we got to have something in the tank left.
You got to have something in the tank left. Man, that's such a bar right there, that we can fight against passivity by taking responsibility. Yes. Not easy, but it requires intentionality. And in doing so, I think you'll be glad you did. But I really think it speaks to the topic of leadership. You know, I found that, I know for me as a pastor and serving in a few different roles or lanes, capacity, as a husband and dad as well, there's all these areas where I can't be passive, right? Like I can be, but my leadership's gonna suffer.
Right.
And, you know, John Maxwell's quote, I think, is always in season: leadership is influence, right? And so it's like with the people that you're influencing, if you're giving passive energy, I think that sets the tone, that sets the culture.
Yeah.
And so I think that could just be a simple way for you to level up this year, is just identifying, okay, what areas am I falling into the sin temptation of passivity, and where do I need to take responsibility? Yeah, I feel like that was convicting for me because, you know, even recently I made a statement similar to that to Nina, just almost like, hey, like, how about you get ahead on the schedule and figure out when the date nights can be, and I'm all in. I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. Just let me know when and where and what we're doing.
Yeah.
And man, that's a very passive approach. That's actually my responsibility. And we've been having good conversations about me leveling up in that area, because with 5 kids and babysitters, the time can just keep ticking without being intentional there. But when I think about my responsibility as a leader, hey, what am I making excuses? What am I doing? Am I going backwards, or am I leveling up?
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the areas that in 2025, or whenever you're listening to this, I think it's a good word to consider, is like, okay, how can I make this my best year of leveling up? I'm going to have to put passivity on the shelf.
Yeah.
And I'm going to have to take responsibility for what I can do. Amen.
Amen. It could be your health. It could be your relationship with God. It could be with your schoolwork. It is just saying, okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to do this. I think it was
It's good, man.
Nick Saban maybe said this, that discipline is the ability to choose to do what no one else wants to do, while also not doing the things that everybody wants to do.
Right.
That's discipline.
That's discipline.
Can you do the things that everybody else does?
Yeah.
Can you also avoid the thing that
Yeah.
everybody else just can't avoid? Man, that is discipline. And probably
Love that.
there's 10 places that we all need to grow. But
Love
maybe
that.
a leader can just say, okay, I'm going to get it on this one. This year, I'm going to actively figure out date night.
Yeah.
I'm going to actively figure out how to get my health in order.
Yes.
I'm going to actively choose one. I'm taking responsibility. I'm not going to blame anybody. It is on me. And I'll tell you this, if you have a lady in your life, she's going to be super excited to see you taking responsibility, because that's what we've been called to do as
I
men.
love that. Man, heck of a word. I think that's really good. I love how you said, hey, there's probably 10 areas you could level up in. Why don't you pick one
Yeah.
and take responsibility for it? Look, the truth is no one's going to do it for you, right? Like there's certain things that God has crafted and created. It's your assignment. It's your appointment. And so I think we gotta level up and go do it.
Yep.
Man, it's been helpful. Two things before we close.
Okay.
Number one, your favorite Laker, all time.
All time,
All time.
Kobe.
My man.
Yeah.
Grateful for you. Let me get a dap
Yeah.
for that. The other thing I wanted you to just speak to is, hey, I know you work with church planters. And if somebody's maybe listening to this or just thinking about a next step in ministry, maybe give us a why to consider church planting, and maybe specifically even in the West Coast.
Yeah. Well, you know, God's working in every single man and woman right now. Every one of them has some uniquenesses. There are some who are going to have an entrepreneurial spirit. God's going to call some of those people to start new businesses. And they need to do that in Christ in a way that honors God and lead from that spot. That's an important calling.
Yep.
But there's going to be a few that have this entrepreneurial spirit and they still feel called to the church. What'll happen is every church you go into just seems like it's broken beyond repair. Let me tell you, that's not true, because God's calling some people to focus in on that brokenness and to see it redeemed. But in your heart, you've got this entrepreneurial desire to do something new, and the place you want to do it most is to affect God's people.
Yeah.
Then you might be a church planter.
That's great.
God's not going to make you that
that.
much different than the businessman down the street who wants to start something new.
Yeah.
You could learn from him and he could learn from you. But if you just found yourself as the guy who wants to start things and a guy who also feels called to ministry, if you're a lady who feels in your spirit, I've got this creative bug that I've got to use for the kingdom of God,
Right.
you very well may be the person that's going to be a part of this church planting movement to see the church thrive in your calling as well.
Yeah.
We all who are
good.
feeling stirred up by something new. You know, everything that we've found in this world that is a new creation came because someone was dissatisfied with the current reality.
Right.
You know, I used to carry around a phone, a digital assistant, which was basically a calendar, and an iPod. All three of them, 3 different devices. And it was like, man, this is a lot.
Yeah.
And then somebody said, why can't these all be the same thing? And I have to carry around 3 things. And that's how we got the smartphone.
Right.
But it was because someone said, this isn't good enough.
Yeah.
If you're the type of person who looks at things and says it's not good enough, that discontent is where your creativity comes from.
Wow.
And if you have some discontent with the church and want to make a difference, a church planter might be who you are.
Man, great breakdown right there. Love that. And we hope to see more church planters raised up, and men and women, couples coming together, jumping in on the front lines of church planting. Maybe they could be team members, But just seeing more churches planted in Las Vegas and California gets me excited. I want to see that happen.
Let's go.
Hey, final thought. We always close the Level Up Leadership podcast with a moment that's just a personal touch.
Yeah.
So in this camera right here, why don't you just take a moment? Somebody's leaning into this on the other side of it and just thinking, okay, I got a lot of good content. What would you tell that person, Will, on where they should start when it comes to leveling up in their leadership?
I'll give you this. Every leader who has made a big difference has had grit. They're the type of person that when pain comes, they don't quit. They're the type of leader that sees the next hill as not one that's going to destroy them, but something that's just the next thing for them to get stronger by. If you want to lead, you can't be a quitter. You must have grit. So work on that. Ensure that you are leveling up in the area of how do I develop more grit? Because the road that you're on to make a big impact is going to be a road of struggle. But the only way you get there is to not quit. And the person who doesn't quit has grit. So level up by having a little bit more grit this year.
Come on, bro. I love that right there. I need to add like a little clapper button or something like that to the podcast. I've been saying that. I'm going to do it. I'm going to really do it. I don't want to I want you to pass it.
I love it.
I need to take responsibility for the sounds, but hey, listen, it's been a great Level Up Leadership podcast, and I'm just honored to have Pastor Will on and grateful that you're on with us. Hey, one more time, consider leaving a comment, drop a subscribe or a like, or share this on social. We love to see that and share it as well. I got better in this session, and we got a lot more good sessions to come. Thank you again for joining us today. Peace.